Well, ladies and gentlemen, as promised, I have another fantastic guest with us today. I have the pleasure and honor of sitting here speaking with Lieutenant Colonel Olivia Nunn. She's retired Army, over 20 years of service, and so much more, because as you're about to hear, she's been very busy continuing to serve our country, fellow veterans, and all of us as a whole. She has been the podcast host of Soldier for Life podcast, also the Never Stop Serving podcast. She's the director of programs for Veteran Success Resource Group. She's also the CEO and founder, of course, of Olivia Nunn Communications. And just this past year, she was crowned Miss Virginia Petite 2023 and named 2023 Veteran Woman Trailblazer. And there's no doubt that that title encompasses all. So, Lieutenant Colonel Nunn, I want to thank you and just welcome to the show.
Thank you so very much, and
Yeah.
I appreciate the chance to be able to share my story with you. So thank you.
No, we're truly honored. Been looking forward to this for a long time. So, if you don't mind, we'll kind of start with I always like to say the origin story of veterans, right? We all have our unique starting point in the service. So, could you walk our listeners through what led you to the service and maybe perhaps specifically the Army? What was the decision that led up to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of shocked when I share this part. I knew since the age of 4 that I wanted to serve in the Army, and that is because my dad is an Army veteran. So I am the oldest of 3 girls. I am daddy's girl, and he was in the Army. The typical, he was in the Army, he was stationed in Korea, he met his wife, and I was the first child that was born. And my dad took me everywhere. In fact, my dad said that when I was a kid, I used to stand in formation with him. He taught me how to shine boots. And this was back in, the 70s and 80s Army when, there was brasso, right? You would light the brasso and all that kind of fun stuff. And I just knew that I wanted to be in the Army because it's what my dad did. And I think there was something that was unique and special. But I will tell you the one thing that my dad was very adamant about, he was enlisted. He was a combat engineer.
Oh,
And the
12,
one
12
thing,
Bravo. Yeah, yeah.
oh bravo. And the one thing that he was adamant about is that he was like, Olivia, you're not going to enlist. I want you to be an officer. And when he was telling that to me as a child, I was like, okay. Like I had no idea what that meant other than, okay, daddy, that's what you're telling me. And I'm, first generation Korean American. And in our culture, in the Asian Korean culture, is that education is prized. And that is, really important. And so he's like, you're going to go to college. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to be an officer. What I was going to be, what I was going to become, how long I was going to stay in the Army, I had no idea other than I knew I was going to be in the Army and I was going to become an Army officer. And that's what I did. I commissioned as a second lieutenant, and the branch that I commissioned into was the Chemical Corps.
Okay. All right. Yeah. NBC or I'm trying to think of the MOS ranks.
Yeah, it was 74 Alpha, and
Okay.
it was originally called NBC, Nuclear, Biological, Chemical. And shortly after I commissioned, they actually changed the acronym to CBRN, Chemical, Biological, Radiological, Nuclear.
Ah.
So, yeah, mouthful. So
Yeah,
you just
yeah.
call it chemo for short, right?
Stick to the acronyms, our old good old Army acronyms. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, 20 years of service, I'm sure you have plenty of stories. Any particular travels or deployments or missions that kind of stick out that you want to mention and reflect on?
Yeah, I did 3 tours to Iraq, and I did that as a company grade officer. And I was there in Iraq during the initial, so OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom 1, 2003 to 2004. Then I went back during the surge period, 2006 to 2008. And then one more time, I was a troop commander, 2009 to 2010. So total of 39 months. So 12 months, 15 months, and 12 months. And each time was a very significant time during Iraq's history. So the initial, the surge, and then the turnover, where we were withdrawing out of the cities and turning over the power or the authority from our army to the Iraqi army, meaning that they were now in charge and we had to pull out of the cities. Um, and it was unique and interesting to watch the different phases and what we were doing while we were deployed. And I think that changes your perception of how you see the world as a leader. When you start your career very young as a first lieutenant, I turned 25 during my first deployment, and I distinctly remember that. I was like, wow, turning a quarter of a century old in this very hot, desolate part of the world. And spending a very early part of your adulthood in combat, that changes you, that forges you in ways that is hard. It hardens you, it shapes you, and it changes you, I think, in so many ways.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. I was 26 myself. I felt like one of the old timers, but I was actually middle aged, you know. So now you mentioned leadership. Of course, you were a leader, but you started as, you know, like many, of course, right out of college, you had folks in front of you teaching you things. 3 deployments, my gosh, I mean, there's so much to cover there, but I guess if there was like one particular lesson or maybe one leader that you had that gave you something that even today still carries a lot of weight with how you kind of look at the world, is there something that kind of sticks out or kind of a theme there that you picked up on?
I mean, I had so many, I had I had good leaders, and then I had, I think, just as anyone could say, I had a lot of shitty leaders, right? Um, but I think throughout in my career, the lesson that stuck with me is people first. I know the Army said that a lot in a lot of its key messages, but truly people first. And my dad taught me that at the very beginning, before I even put on my uniform as a cadet, before I started Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC, in college. My dad told me, hey, Olivia, if you put people first, your soldiers first, right? If we're using Army vernacular, if you put your soldiers first and your soldiers know authentically that you put them first and you take care of them, they will always take care of you. And if you do so, your missions will always be successful. And I'm not talking about that the mission is successful in the way of that that you're winning, right? That the mission is successful in the way that it's supposed to be done in the eyes of ensuring that your people, your soldiers, are being taken care of, right? That you bring them home, that they're taken care of, right?
Yeah, it's a successful team. Yeah.
Right. And here's the thing: as an officer, you are told at the very beginning, the success and failure of the organization rests solely on you. And that happens when you build a team of teams. And you can be arrogant about it or you can be humble. And that happens when you put the priority of the people first. When you choose to make choices for the whole of the organization, not for an individual, so not for yourself, not for one person in the organization, but for the whole of the organization. And that is tough, right? Leadership is a lonely place to be. Time and time again, it didn't matter what job I had, whether it was just a section leader or being the company commander. Leadership is a lonely place to be, right? Every step you take, every decision that you make, the words that you say, the words that you don't say, you're always being judged and weighed. But everything that I did, everything that I chose not to do, I always made with the interest of my soldiers. That I hoped that everything that I was making or doing or not doing was for the organization as a whole.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I love the connection there to your father teaching you early on. It's like a generational, perhaps some of his uh, less positive leaderships that he had to endure as a 12 Bravo later became something that helped you become a better leader. So that's wonderful. And then if I could ask, when did you retire? When did that come about?
Yeah, so my last day in the Army was August 31st, 2021.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Coming up on 3 years here.
Gonna say right, pandemic era. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh
I
boy.
got my paperwork right in the middle of the pandemic. And that was not fun. That was not fun at all.
You're like, I'll see your 6 feet distance and I will go further.
Yeah. So the world was in chaos and I'm trying to retire. It was really tough, right?
Yeah.
When you're retiring, that is a divorce, right? That is a divorce from the Army. You're trying to figure out the next step in your life, and you are shedding who you used to be. And that is a hard journey to take.
Agreed. I often say that it's amazing how much research, time, and money we've spent to develop a great process of turning perhaps a teenager into a service member. But it's only in recent years that we started to realize we have to spend a little bit of time and research on how to turn a soldier or a service member into a veteran. That needs some effort as well, because otherwise we have some pitfalls there. So what was your initial transition like? What was the first did you travel? Did you go to work? What was the first phase of how you migrated into the veteran world?
Oh, it was rough. I'm not even gonna lie, and I've shared this before on other podcast. My transition was rough, and the irony of it was that my last job in the United States Army was U.S. Army Soldier for Life. I was the public affairs officer or the director of communications for U.S. Army Soldier for Life. I ran all the social media, and also I did the podcast, which you had said earlier. I was the podcast host for U.S. Army Soldier for Life, and I developed a following and network, which I loved. I loved that job. And I was supposed to be an expert at transitioning, right? And layman's term, Soldier for Life is an organization, a strategic organization that helps in the world of transition. In other words, matchmaking, right? Army meet organizations, organizations meet Army in the way of employment, health and wellness, and education. And so here I am as a lieutenant colonel, right? I've done well. I'm at the top of my game. I'm a lieutenant colonel. I'm at 20 years, and I know these organizations. They know me. I've done well. I've created these great relationships, and I'm supposed to know how to do this, right? I talk about it. I share resources, and yeah, I should ace this, right? I've been telling people how to do this for 3 years. Yeah, and I failed miserably. I crashed and burned. And here's why. Even though I knew the steps logically, because I've been teaching it, I've been telling people how to do it. I know what the steps are. I've been preparing for the steps. I even podcasted about the steps. I even tell you where these organizations are. What it doesn't prepare you for is how you're going to feel about it, right? And the part that I wasn't ready for was the following. No one could prepare you for the pandemic because no one knew about it.
Right.
Two, the other part was I went through an unexpected divorce. And that brought me to rock bottom. And when that brought me to rock bottom, there was a couple other things that I had to deal with in those moments. I'm now divorcing the Army. So now I have to deal with all of the emotions, all of the trauma of having to come to the realization of everything that I am, everything that I've been, in that recognition of that uniform, the cloth of our nation, right? Because I am Lieutenant Colonel Nunn. I won't be Lieutenant Colonel Nunn, right? That uniform represented so much of who I am, all the accolades, all the things that I've earned, so much so for 20 years is now being stripped from me, right? I didn't know who to be without that. And I was a wife, a mother, and a soldier. And that was all being taken away, right? Because I was going through this unexpected divorce. And the only thing I was going to be was just Olivia and a mom, right? I was no longer going to be a soldier, and I was no longer going to be a wife. And then on top of that, we were in this pandemic. And then I had to come and face the dark reality of all the trauma of my service. I never really effectively dealt with my 3 deployments. I didn't deal with all the things that had happened during my 3 deployments. I just kind of shoved them into boxes, and I just like, yeah, well, I'll just deal with it later. I've talked about this in other places. I had been assaulted by my own soldier. I've survived, other things that have happened to me in combat, which I just really didn't talk about. And a lot of it had to do with guilt. A lot of it had to do with, I felt like I wasn't enough. I felt like I shouldn't talk about it because, well, these incidences weren't as graphic or as important or as big because I was a woman in these situations and I wasn't supposed to be there, or because I wasn't the door kicker, because I didn't get blown to smithereens and I don't have a Purple Heart, or all these other things, and therefore my story isn't enough. So I'm just gonna accept the fact that I'm here. So I'm just not gonna talk about it. And I had to come to grips with all of those pieces of trauma that had happened during my service, because now they were staring me in my face, along with what I felt like was my marriage falling apart. And now I felt like a failure, right? I am a Christian, and there's this sense of failure, like I'm such a loser. Here I am at the top of my game as an Army officer, and the sense of I made it to the top. People had always said that, wow, you guys are a power couple, you guys are beautiful, you have a beautiful family, and your career is amazing. And now it's just I felt ashamed, right? And all of that was just this weight and this sense of um, this heaviness. Um, and that was my transition out of the Army, and I just didn't know how to carry that load, and everything was dark for me.
Yeah, and it's like compounding the trauma and the experiences all at once and all the deferred things. Like you mentioned, you put things on a box. That box goes on a mental shelf, and that shelf gets really heavy. And eventually, it's all going to come down. So what were some of the tactics you used to kind of get yourself through that, and how did you come out on the other side?
Um, so I think because of being part of Soldier for Life, I did start opening up my Rolodex and go through the resources that I know, and a lot of them were tapped out. And I want to make this very clear. It's not that these resources didn't want to help me. They did. They just didn't have the capacity to help me.
Mm,
They just were tapped out. They didn't
sure.
have the ability to. And I was really at my wit's end, and I almost gave up. And there was something that just kind of pushed me to kind of keep going. And I said, I'll try one more time, one more call, one more organization. And if I don't get help, then I'm going to tap out. Um, uh, uh, so there's that. Um, and then, and I mentioned this actually yesterday, because yesterday was PTSD Awareness Day, and buddy checks, right? It is so important that you do buddy checks, and not just on the day of PTSD Awareness Day, but daily, right? Um, it is important that you check on your friends, and not just text. Pick up the phone, right? And ask that hard question, and ask your buddy, hey, are you doing okay? Like truly, like don't give me a BS answer. How are you doing? I had a couple friends really ask me that hard question and say, "Yeah, we're going to lunch." And I'm going to look you dead in the eye, and you're going to answer me that question, right? Um, and then faith, right? Lots of prayer, therapy. I had to go into therapy. Um, and then the other part is, and I think this is the hard one. I think a lot of people don't want to hear this because it's hard. You have to do the work. And that work is you've got to look at yourself, and you've got to realize that sometimes you got to be your own hero, right? Um, and you've got to recognize that you've got to do the work. And in the first step, and this is the hardest step, is that you got to ask for help, right? Once you ask for help, then everything is forward, right? Everything else is forward after you ask for help. That is the very first step. And that was the hardest thing for me to do. It was the hardest words to ever utter out of my mouth was, I need help.
Mhm.
Because in our culture, it is not the way we do things, right? We don't ask for help. Majority of us are type A, we're aggressive, we're perfectionists, right? We've got it all. We know how to do it. Um, and people think that we know better. And so it's our ego, it's our pride. And in fact, if you look at my social media even now, I think a lot of people think that I still have everything together. And that's far from the truth. That is so far from the truth. And I've said this before, I spend more times in darkness than I do in light. I still struggle on a daily basis. I don't have my shit together. I really don't, even if my social media shows that, even if it looks like I'm having a great time, or even if it looks like I have all my ducks in a row, I don't. Um, my job, I am a social media branding communication specialist. That's what I do. I'm really good at what I do, but that doesn't mean that my shit's together or that,
Right.
that my life is amazing. Um, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're still human, so that's okay. So, well, walk us through. I mean, thank God, of course, you had your faith. You got your friends and folks around you that, like you said, the good old fashioned buddy check. Um, Even in basic training, the buddy check was to make sure the person next to you is awake. You'd punch them in the shoulder. So I still do that from time to time when I run into my buddies. But walk us through some of the things that you hit some pretty good positive milestones just recently as well. How do those opportunities come about? And I'm gonna kind of be a spoiler alert and say I know that you developed your own opportunities, of course. But what led you to kind of starting some of these programs, working with these groups, and of course, you have your own communications business as well. So, what were some of the things that prompted that, and um, how folks can kind of learn more about what you're doing now?
Yeah. So, we talked about this in Soldier for Life, and I think, and it manifests itself in what I do. And what I'm driving at is networking, right? My nickname is Networking Queen. And what do I mean by that, right? Network, network, network. You cannot be a wallflower, right? Whether that's digitally or in person. You
Mm.
have to get out, you have to meet people. And I know that I'm an extrovert. So people are like, well, you're an extrovert. So that's easy for you, Olivia. And I'm an introvert. That's kind of hard. I get it. But you do need to, and this goes back to what we talked about earlier. It's investing in people, putting people first. That's what you've got to do. You've got to invest in your network. And it's kind of, so let me give you a visual, right? It's that whole ripple, right? You drop a pebble on this side of the pond and it creates a ripple and it just keeps on going. And you never know what it looks like on the other side. So what you do today may manifest maybe tomorrow, or maybe a week later, or maybe even years later. But the point is that you have to get out and meet people and be kind. And whatever it is that you're doing, and it isn't for yourself, but for the whole. And the whole is the military community. And when you go out and you meet people, hi, my name's Olivia. This is what I do. What do you do? And when you make those connections and you try to figure out how you help each other, those connections come back in the way of, you know, how do we help each other? And that's really what has helped me all along. That helped me when I got out of the army, when I was looking for a job, right? That network is how I landed my first job. And I talked about that 72 hours I had a conversation and I said, I'm looking for a job. And I had another phone call to the interview to here's your offer, right?
Hmm.
All because of the network, right? That connection. And then the same thing as, that connection when I was in Soldier for Life, I was an organization that was asked to go to Burbiz, which is hosted by Veteran Success Resource Group. Scott Davidson, a co-founder, said, hey, Soldier for Life, would you like to be at this event? Got a table for you? Sure. Loved hanging out there. I developed a friendship with Scott Davidson. And then when I retired, he's the friend that I talked about that said, what are you doing? We're going to lunch.
Right.
And I'm not taking no for an answer. And he looked me dead in the eye and he said, don't give me a BS answer. How are you doing? Right. And he reminded me, and I've said this before, and I've shared this in other places. He reminded me of my purpose, what I was good at, you know, what I was capable of, right? And he said, "Get your LLC together. I've got work for you," right? Um, and that was a lifeline for me. And I've talked about how Scott was a lifeline and a friend that saved my life, a key person in my life. And so I became a media ambassador for Veteran Success Resource Group for Burbiz. And that's why people started seeing my face when I retired for Burbiz. And then from there, time moved on and I became one of the directors for Veteran Success Resource Group. And specifically, I became the director for Burbiz.
Hmm.
And then just recently, a couple months ago, I moved up in Veteran Success Resource Group for being the director of all programs, right? So Veteran Success Resource Group is a military nonprofit organization here in the DC area that puts on a host of programs aimed directly for the military community. We've got a fundraising golf tournament that's coming up. We do Burbiz, a couple times a year here in the DC area. We do host it in other cities in America, and we do programs that are aimed for our military families. Oftentimes you'll see Scott or other members of our team that will go to Congress, have roundtable discussions. Our founder and co-founders, Scott Davidson, you'll see him, advocate on the Hill. That we are actively involved in the military community doing so much. But again, that goes back to what I was just talking about, networking, developing that friendship. That same network, developing that friendship, years ago, brought in a conversation. Hey, Olivia, I think it would be great if you could be part of this organization called Pan-Pacific Leaders and Mentors that has a direct memorandum of agreement with the United States Army. And this organization was founded by General Shinseki.
Hmm.
That name is very powerful, right? A lot of people
Yeah.
know because he was the chief of staff of the Army, the very first Asian American officer, right? So I serve as the vice president of communication for that organization. Again, where did that start? Because I developed a friendship, a network years ago, right? With the previous vice president of the organization. And again, we had been friends for like 20 some years and she brought me on. So that's what I'm saying. Like that was a ripple and the
Right.
20 years, right? So
Right.
what I'm driving at is that you never know the connection or the friendship that you develop today could lead to something else later on. And the key part is develop your network, be kind, and give back to the community that has given so much to you. And that community I'm talking about is that military community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we all can agree that there's almost an instant bond. You run into someone on the street, wind up winds up being another veteran. It's as if you already know you have a few things in common, no matter what else in the conversation comes out of it. You're just like, well, we both served, we both raised our hand, we both, went through some sacrifices, and why wouldn't you stay connected and reach out to fellow veterans in the military community? I mean, we like to help. That's why we served to begin with. So yeah, it's another guest on, I'm trying to remember who brought this up, but they use that old phrase, excuse me, your network is your net worth.
Yep.
It's very true. It's very true. So why don't you use it? I mean, it's there. So and you get to help in return. It's kind of a win-win. It's like a force multiplier. Well, this is all fantastic stuff. What can our listeners do to help you in some of these organizations? Is there maybe a website, or you mentioned fundraising? Is there some things you want to put out there, and we can put some links on line as well. What else can we do to support you and the missions you're working on?
Yeah, so I think it's hard, right? Because I think I'm kind of everywhere.
Yeah.
But all of it drives, regardless of what I'm doing from a personal perspective or a professional perspective, everything that I do drives back to one singular thing that I'm driving towards, and that is to end military suicide. We're at 44 a day, and I want to drive that to zero.
Mm.
And that's because of my own story, which I shared earlier. And um and I think what we didn't talk about is that besides my own story and going into consulting and all of that, is that I got into pageantry. And I'm a motivational speaker, I do modeling, I do voiceover talent work as well. Everything that I do is to be able to highlight the conversation of mental health, to shine a light, to break the silence, to end the stigma, and to rewrite the narrative when it comes to military mental health. That we don't have enough resources, not only for our military members, but also for our military spouses and for our military children. And we have to change that conversation. We've got to bring those resources. And in order to do that, we've got to bring two communities. And the communities I'm talking about is the military community and the civilian community. I believe with every fiber of my being that the people that have the money, the people that have the knowledge to be able to make change because they have the brain power and they're the scientists and the doctors, and the people with the equipment, they're all out there. In fact, maybe even listening, but they're just misaligned. They just don't know each other. And we just got to get them in the right place. My personal goal is I'm looking for funders who would help me create a place in San Antonio as the first stop, and then I want to go nationwide. Me and my partner want to create a place where we are treating veterans that are substance users and TBI, because there's an overlap in how you treat them, and just military veterans themselves, and be able to get after driving that space, right? Mental health, so that we can get suicide down to zero. So I'm looking for funders for that, because everything that I do, I want to drive that conversation to there. You could find me on social media. You know, I'm on Instagram as the Olivia Nunn. I have my own website, which is www.olivianunn.com. I am on LinkedIn. You could find me there. Veteran Success Resource Group does have their own website as well. They are also on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook. You can find us there. Either way, whether I'm involved with Pan-Pacific Leaders and Mentors, PPOM for short, or Veteran Success Resource Group, or the things that I do, everything that I do, I'm so heavily tied and knitted together with those communities. I just, anything that anybody would want to help when it comes to helping the military community, especially when it comes to mental health or military food scarcity, or just bettering our military community, you know, to me is a foot in the right direction, right? Especially when we're talking about funding. You know, that's my passion. That's what wakes me up every single day.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's absolutely great, ma'am. Let me say this and just kind of add and agree with you here. When you mentioned that there's a disconnect between folks that have the resources, more importantly, I know firsthand there's a lot of folks that have the resources and actually want to help. They want to do something, but they don't understand, we'll say, our world. They just don't understand it. They see the same data in the newspaper, or they hear a clip about PTSD and they go, oh, what a shame. What can we do? Here's a check. Well, we've come a long way. There's no doubt about that. We've come a long way from what we used to do to treat this, right? First of all, we changed the language. You know, it used to be shell shock. Then it was, you know, the war fatigue. You know, George Carlin, who served, by the way, he had a little bit of a bit about that, but there's a lot of seriousness in that bit about the language changing. However, I think where we made some mistakes, and to some degree the VA is still learning this lesson. If we had a veteran or a service member break a leg in battle, you know, multiple fractures, leg, you know, bone out, the whole nine, they're going to see a medic. They're going to eventually see a surgeon. They're going to have multiple people assisting that troop with that broken leg. And then on top of that, afterwards, there's going to be, you know, physical therapy. There's going to be check-ins. There's going to be pain management. There's going to be all sorts of things that line up to that one physical injury. And for the longest time for whatever reason, for the longest time, mental health was treated as like this artificial, you know, like almost like, well, we don't really know how to describe the level of what you're dealing with. So, you know, we just arbitrarily will decide this is the medicine, or this is you get 3 appointments to talk about it with somebody. And that's not, you know, that's a start, but that's not the answer.
Right.
If you took the broken leg analogy and said, well, we've seen this before, so just come back every other week.
Yeah.
We'll look at your leg for a few minutes and then you should be fine.
No, 100%. And I'm glad that you brought this up, right? So that your listeners understand why we have this issue, right? And why I'm asking for this and why I'm looking for donors, why I'm asking for money, right? This is the issue that we have in our community is that we can't get to treat. One, there's not enough places that are treating us. Two, we can't get to treatment in a timely enough manner. So that's why we've got this high number of veteran suicide or military suicide on a daily basis. Three, a lot of within our community, we don't have funding, as in a lot of us live check to check, right? And so I think that's a shock to the civilian community. They don't realize the financial situation that a lot of our military families face, right? I think a lot of them would be shocked to find out that a lot of our military families live check to check. They can't even fill their pantries with food. And so if you can't fill your pantries with food, do you think that you're going to be able to go take care of yourself on a mental health basis, let alone go find treatment? And if you're on a wait list, there's so much controversy when it comes to the VA. They're good, they're bad, they're indifferent. And I don't want to get into that part of the conversation, but I will just say, right, I've been out for almost 3 years, and just to even kind of get help on the outside, it's a slow road. I am getting help, but just to even talk to a counselor, right? It's like a 3-month wait to get to my first counseling, session. That I'm not in a crisis mode, but there are many that if you're in a crisis mode, and to give you the analogy, when I'm saying crisis mode, what if I was standing at the edge of the cliff, or if I had the gun in my hand, right? To give you that visual, that's what I'm talking about, that crisis mode. How do we get treatment to that veteran when they are in that moment, right? You can't tell that veteran in that moment, we can talk to you in 3 months.
Yeah.
Right. And prescribing them medicine just to like, here, take 2 and call me in the morning, that cannot be the answer. And so that's what I'm looking for is how do we create spaces and places when someone picks up the phone, right there in that moment, and here's a number, right? Here's a number to talk to somebody to literally get you off that cliff. And then the next spot, now that we've gotten you off the cliff, we can insert you at a treatment facility who's going to take care of you. And don't worry about the bill. Don't worry about what it's going to cost you, because we've got funders that's going to help take care of you. Yeah, we're going to go through TRICARE, do all that stuff. We're going to exhaust those means, but at the same time, we've got angel funders who are going to make sure that you're going to be taken care of. That is the treatment facility that I'm trying to build, right? That no veteran will be turned away, because the truth is it is expensive. It is not cheap, right? And I want to be able to treat these veterans by whatever means, right? Whether it's psilocybin, whether it's equine therapy, whether it's, whatever means. I want to open up that aperture from traditional medicine to other types of other therapies. What may work for you may not work for me, but it could work for somebody else. And that's what I want to do. I want to open that aperture wide, because we truly don't understand the gray matter, right? And that's where that injury is, right? We've got moral injury, we've got so much, and we need to start understanding that space. Here's another case in point. To really understand this, right? We got to scan our brain. It's called an MRI, right? Yep. And majority of our veterans have not had their brain scanned. But let's get more technical to this. You need to get your brain scanned by a very powerful MRI. Most hospitals, to include military hospitals, have a Tesla level 1 MRI machine. By the way, if you get your brain scanned by a Tesla level 1, this part of the brain with a level 1, that that image is kind of fuzzy. So what's the point of getting an MRI done with a level 1 if this part, which is
most of the problems are,
right, is kind of fuzzy? You need like a level 3 or a level 5, right? Really, a 5 would be more ideal. There's not very many 5s in the nation. It's kind of pricey, but that's where we need to put our veterans through. So that's what I'm talking about. The machines, the scientists, the doctors, the money. We need to get those all aligned, and we need to start pushing our service members and our veterans through those machines, so that way we have a clear image, and getting the right type of imaging done, giving it to the right doctors, the right scientists that can look at that image and say, hey, I'm looking at this image. I see this type of distortion or thing or whatever, medical term that they're looking at. And I'm looking at this and I see this. Aha, maybe this is the treatment. Maybe this is the thing that I need to be giving it to you, right? And it's not take two and call me in the morning, right? That's what I'm driving at. Um, and those are the things that I'm finding out on my own. I went to Auburn University and found out they're going to get a level 10 machine. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Um, and that brought me to my knees. I was crying. Um, they're a great research facility. I'm sure they're going to do great things, but
It's because of their sports program.
right. But how many
Yep.
military
Yeah.
veterans?
No,
gonna
you're right on. You're right on, and I'm gonna agree with you. And I'm also gonna tell our listeners this, and the fact that your MOS for many years was in NBC. I'm gonna just follow me with this. I promise it works. The money we spend is this, the government contracting dollars that we spend to build Bradley tanks, missile silos, NBC, and forgive me, I'm not using the modern language there for your MLS, but you know what I'm saying. Biochemical, all the R&D money we spend to develop better weapons to go to war with, the machines you're talking about are nowhere near the price points of the weapons we take to battle with us. And yet it seems to me this is where the funding really should be considered is, you know, the I don't want to go into a political rant here, but I'll just say the amount of money spent in the DoD system to arm our troops should be considering those X-ray machines as a way to protect and improve the best weapon we have, which is the mind of an American service member.
Yep.
We all have in us courage. There's so many things that describes the average Joe and Jane in the ranks that without the psychological health, battles do not get won. Battles get lost over there and they get lost here.
Yep.
So I'm with you. I can remember, 30, whatever, how many years it's been now. I remember going through the ASVAB and I remember going through the Buffalo downtown MEPS Center. You get your shots, your initial exams. They x-ray your teeth, right? They x-ray all sorts of things. Why isn't this to me is like the most obvious. What you're talking about, I've talked about this with friends as well. What you're talking about is just so obvious that this has to be done. Take the broken leg analogy. You're going to start with an x-ray. Get a scan of the gray mat, get a scan of everything, and then do a full thorough exam. Go from there. And now you also have data. You imagine that multiplied by all the combat veterans, all the ones like yourself, 3 tours. You get all those things sent off to research labs, and the people that say they want to help can start helping. Because
Yep.
you're going to start seeing a lot of common things. Okay, well, this service member had a traumatic brain injury. This service member had, you line it all up, figure it out, look at the treatment results, and improve the recovery process. And I don't care what it costs. I do not care what those machines cost. It's a fraction. We'll we'll put one less, dummy dud with a 25% fail rate acceptable sticker price of a missile into a sub. We'll just skip one if we have to.
Yep.
And our fighting forces will be better off for it during and after the war. So
Yep.
yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to get our communities to understand. I mean, I think the military community definitely gets that, but our civilian partners to understand of what I'm desperately trying to get that message across of why we need partnership and what I'm asking for and why I'm asking for these dollars to really get funding and why we need funding and why we need your help, right? It's not just, cut a check and
Yeah.
you did good, right? It's really understanding where our problem is, and why we need you to advocate for us, why you need to go to Capitol Hill and really put pressure on politicians to make a change. You know, military families shouldn't have to suffer, right? They shouldn't have to suffer and have empty pantries,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
The amount of albeit it's usually lower ranked, but even if it's not, it doesn't matter what the rank is. You have service members out there on food stamps.
Yep.
And just recently they're again, I'm not going to get political. We don't do that in the show, but math is math. And if you don't take care of your service members and you have a system now with because of the pandemic and inflation and all these other things, you have a free market system where people can go and earn more, entry level, no experience, no nothing. 16-year-olds can walk into a coffee house and make more than someone who has suspended their own personal freedoms, their own way of life to serve our country. And they're willing to die for those that don't even appreciate what they're doing. And we can't at least give them enough money to survive. I mean, there's something really bad with that math. It's beyond offensive.
And there's so many layers, right? It's not
Well,
just
there's so many layers.
right. It's not just not enough money for food. It's also, cost of daycare, right? I was a dual military family, right? And I live, it didn't matter where I went, specifically if you're in a high cost area like the DC area, daycares are hard to find. It's a
Sure.
cost of daycare. My boss didn't want to hear I couldn't come to work. I have to be at work.
Yeah.
Both of us were military officers. We had 2 kids. They had to be in daycare. There's laws in like how long the kids could be at daycare. All of those things, those impact military families and the readiness, right? We always had to be ready to go to war if one of us had to, had to go, or both of us, right?
Mm.
Those are, like you said, those are decisions and impacts to the family. No, by the way, every 2 or 3 years we're moving. And those are
Right.
things that families outside of the military don't understand. And those are the things that are unique to us in the military community that need to be understood and advocated for. And and it's what makes us unique. It's what makes us stronger. It's what makes us resilient. But we do need help, right? We're not asking for charity. We're not asking for a handout. We're just asking for the community to come together and understand that we do have some challenges. And that's why I feel that messaging and having this conversation about mental health is so important. We do need to drive 44 to 0. And I feel like that is my legacy that I want to work on.
Well, I'm certainly in agreement with you on that. And I'm up here in upstate New York. We're near a pretty large military installation, and there's quite a few of them. And I've traveled and I've gone to these things where sometimes they show off the new weapons and the new equipment and all the new stuff you're gonna spend, money on. And I'm thinking, my gosh, a pittance of just a rounding error is what the service members are looking for to make sure we're in the best physical and mental health to do the job. And the liability of not having people mentally and physically fit to do the job is far greater than whatever you think you're saving. And the healthcare costs when things aren't treated, let's take the broken leg analogy again. What if they said, well, we'll deal with that in 3 months? Well, now you get someone that can't serve ever. They're undeployable at that point. So hopefully everyone gets on the same page as what you're advocating here, because every day that goes by, we're having unfortunate and unnecessary losses and casualties because we're not addressing this in the proper tone and we're not using the right math. So I commend you very much for what you're working on. Folks, this is just, we could probably talk all day, but I'll let Lieutenant Colonel Nunn get on with her other work because she's doing great work for everybody. Please check out her site, follow her online. She's covering so many things, but ultimately, like she said, her passion there is to help get that number from 44 to 0. And I, pray every day that we can work on that as a group together. So thank you so much. I do have one final question. It's kind of a fun one, okay? My final question for you is I'm one of these silly people. I like time travel. I like thinking about that. So having gone through everything you've experienced from the young age of 4 when you knew you're going to be in the army, okay, to everything you've gone through, ups and downs and all around. If you had a chance now to go back in time and just have like a minute, just like 1 minute with your younger self before you join the service, what would be the conversation? What would be your advice, guidance, warnings, whatever? What would you say to a young Olivia before she embarks on this incredible journey?
Uh, I think in order to properly understand that, I would have to preface that by saying, is not to have fear and to have courage and to go for it. And the reason why I say that is I am biracial. I am Korean and I'm English. And I grew up in the 80s, which was the assimilation culture. Act white, be white, do white. And so my culture was stripped away from me. In second grade, my teacher told my parents, whatever language you're speaking at home, stop it because her English sucks. And so everything about me was taken away. So I understand Korean, but I don't speak it. And I always felt and was told I was never enough. The Koreans told me I was too white. The whites told me I was too Korean. And I always felt like I never belonged. So I always felt like I was, and I was told this consistently from both sides. I was too short, too fat, too this, too that, too like everything about me was, I was picked on. And that leaves some scars, right? Some really deep-seated scars. And I was quiet when I was a child, and it wasn't until later that really learned how to turn some aggression on and just to be very vocal and to really start hard charging. So I would say to myself, my younger self, is not to be afraid. Everything that I wanted to try, everything that I wanted to do is what you see now. If you're following me on social media, right? You'll see that I'm modeling now. I wanted to do that when I was younger. Um, you know, going into pageantry, a lot of that is trying to find my feminine side because I was very aggressive and very focused on my male energy in the military. And, that's so learning to be softer, all of that. So I would tell my younger self is to not worry about everybody else, right? To accept who you are, to not be afraid and to have courage and just to go forward.
Excellent. Well said, ma'am. That's great advice. So, well, I want to thank you so much for your time, and we're going to take a quick break here at the station, and I'm going to have a fun song in your honor. But folks, this has been another wonderful talk with Lieutenant Colonel Olivia Nunn. Please check her out. The website is olivianunn.com. That's Nunn. Please check it out. Follow her. You're going to want to track her mission, and by all means, if you can help work on this incredible advocacy she's doing on behalf of the military and veterans, yours truly will be greatly appreciative for the help. So thank you so much, ma'am. And folks, enjoy this tune in Lieutenant Colonel Nunn's honor. Stand by.